Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of Booked, a place to explore the realms of creativity. Today's guest is Sarah Arnoux. Thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm excited. Very excited. I've recently finished reading your book.
Oh, thank you. You know what? It's always so anxiety provoking when someone's actually read it.
Oh, it was good, if that helps.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
I did. Honestly, I raced through it. I love it when a book isn't 5,000 pages long and it packs in a lot of stuff.
See, I like a novella, and I
Me
don't know
too.
why people get so funny about short books. Because sometimes especially if you're in a reading slump,
Mhm.
just pick up a novella or something. You've read it, and then it feels like you've achieved something.
Oh, thank you. Someone finally said it. Because I love a long book, don't get me wrong. I love getting into it. I love crawling into the pages. That sounds creepy. I like being in the universe and seeing everything happen around me. And sometimes I'm like, give me a good story quick. I need to consume it. And then I
Yeah.
like whiz through it frantically like a little creature. And then I'm like, okay, so I finished it. And now I feel better. Just like you said, you just gotta dive in sometimes.
Yeah.
Um so you pack in a heck of a lot of drama into this book.
I tried.
Um, you did a good job. I was like, okay, I don't normally go for things that have a historically feel. Um, I just realised I haven't even said the name of the book, so I'm going to say that. So the book that we are talking about, that I'm getting excited about, is Amissis Liberis. So this presents itself, or presented itself to me as like a historical drama sort of vibe. And I was like, okay, it's going to be like The Crown or whatever. And that's not the sort of thing that I felt. But don't worry, I was wrong. So I was like, okay, I don't know if I'm going to enjoy this, but I'm going to give it a go because I really care about trying new things in terms of art, which is what writing is. And you'll hear me say this again and again in these episodes, is that writing is an art form, and each person has a unique voice, and the creativity that you have is different from the next person. So I want to give it a go, even if it's not something I would normally read. Now, you have so many different things going on in this. So we've got betrayal, we've got revenge, we've got drama, some murder. Not trying to give away any spoilers. You don't know who's murdering who.
There's just a
We've got
tiny bit of murder in that.
just a smidge of murder,
Tiniest bit of murder.
a little bit of bloodshed there.
A little
Violence,
bit.
loyalties questioned. And there are some things that I just want to warn readers about before we continue, just in case there are some uncomfortable themes that people don't want to hear about.
It is an
So,
uncomfortable book for a lot of people, but I would rather that people warned.
of course, yeah. So, if I know some people are not into trigger warnings, so mute me for a second if you're not. But I just wanted to mention that there are some mentions of uh, sexual assault. There's grief, there's child loss. As I said, there's murder and there's a lot of violence. It's purposeful. It's not gratuitous. It means something to the plot of the story. And if these themes do make you uncomfortable, then please do refrain from listening to the rest of the episode in case there are things that you don't want to hear. Because I care about people's feelings, and there's no point in putting people in an uncomfortable position. If I have the choice to not do that. So,
Yeah. And please don't read the book if it's going to trigger you.
oh yeah, that as well. I don't mean to laugh as a coping
No,
mechanism, but
you would be surprised. There's been
yeah.
people who have been like, "Oh, am I going to like it?" And I've been like, "You are definitely not going to like it." And they're like, "Oh, I'm going to give it a shot." And I was like, "Please don't. I really don't want you to be in a position where you feel triggered, or you're
Mm,
upset, or you're brought back to something in your past that you don't want to go back to because of a book. It's not
yeah.
worth it."
hmm Absolutely. That being said, if you do have the ability to read or consume art that has these themes, boy, howdy, you in for a treat because it's really good. As I said,
Thank
it's
you.
not. Of course, as I said, it's not gratuitous. It's done with respect. You can tell that there's a need for it to be in there. It's not. It's part of the plot. It's not thrown in there for fun or for shock value. So rest assured that if you do, give that a go, it is done respectfully. So I've done my safety speech, and now I want to get into the creativity side of things because I've talked for quite long enough.
Okay.
Um, so please, Sarah, I want to know where this came from.
My messed up brain. So last I how do I start it? I really enjoy Mike Flanagan's work,
Mhm.
and my favourite one of his was Bly Manor that he did on Netflix. And
Mhm.
then I think it was last October he released the what was it? The Fall of the House of Usher, which was based on a lot of Poe works,
Mm.
like works
Mhm.
from Edgar Allan Poe, which obviously in my angsty I'm not like other girls phase as a teenager, I read a lot of Poe. Um, I was like the weirdest. I'm not like other girls. Like I was like I'm into the classics. Um, it's just me at school reading Jane Eyre, like Wuthering Heights. But I watched The Fall of the House of the Usher and I was so like taken by it, and I immediately was like, I want to write something like this that has like the big dynastic family destroying each other sort of vibes. And I immediately tried to write something like that. I always knew it was going to be a novella because I'm a chronic underwriter.
Mhm.
Um, but I just couldn't do it at the time. And I firmly believe that because I'm one of these people, I've got a massive document full of like ideas for books. I'm not even joking, about like 10 works in progress at the minute.
Same.
And
I'm the
it's
same, and
awful.
I'm never going to finish them.
No, I've got so many ideas I'm excited about, but that it's not right yet. I firmly believe that when it's time for that story to be written, it
Mhm.
will find its way back to me. So I put it
Nice.
down. I had planned to do it for NaNoWriMo last year. Um,
Mhm.
Ended up not doing it because of life stuff. I had
Mhm.
some health stuff going on, and then in the January, I was like, "Oh, I've got an idea," and I wrote the first draft of it in like 3 days.
Oh wow.
Because when I when I get hyperfixated on something, like that's it. I have quite a lot of very niche hyperfixations, and which you can tell in my work.
Oh, yeah. It's there's a lot going on, and you pack a punch.
I mean, maybe we'll
Um.
talk about the hyperfixations later because I swear to God it gets even weirder than it did. But I've always been very hyperfixated on Queen Victoria, and this
Oh.
isn't the first thing I've written
Mhm.
around her, but I've written other pieces around Queen Victoria. I was in screenwriting for a while. I wrote a
Mhm.
script around her, which I want to convert into a book one day.
Oh
Um,
wow.
and then one day I don't even know, I wasn't even necessarily looking at this project. But then I was like, oh, if I just put Queen Victoria in as the inciting incident, that fixes the plot.
Hmm.
And then I wrote it in 3 days, and then I literally spent all of January just hyper fixated on this project. I like could not tear myself away from it. I was in work. Luckily, at the job I was in at the time, fantastic team,
Mhm.
and they just would let me scribble away while I was supposed to be working. And it was a very very boring cinema. I did the morning shifts. No one comes to the cinema in the morning, so it's just me at the kiosk with my little notebook, like screaming at any
Oh.
staff member who comes near me. Like, so it literally was like done in a month.
Oh wow. And that was this January.
Yes,
I
January
say this
24.
January. Yeah, 2024 because this
Yeah,
episode will air next year. So you wrote it in January and you published it in May.
yes.
That's a very short turnaround.
Yes, it might not have been the wisest decision, but I was just like, I have to do something with it now. I have to go. And I've been querying a novel project for a few months at this point, and I was
Mhm.
like, who says you can't query two things at once? Um, and so I sent it to a few indie presses,
Mhm.
because I figured a novella, traditional publishing, you do get novellas done by like traditional publishers.
Mhm.
but there are a lot less. There's a lot less of them.
Mm.
They tend and they tend to be from more established authors.
Yeah.
And I was like, and considering the subject matter, I was like, I think this will do better at a small press. So I
For
sent it
sure.
out to a few places, and Red from Alien Budapest got back to me really quickly and was like, "Yeah, I want this. I want to publish this." And I
That's
was like, "Oh,
cool.
go ahead."
Amazing. So, what was that process like for you? Because I've not been through the indie press phase. Hopefully, I will do in the future. But how
I'm
did that
rooting
work
for
for
you.
you? Oh, thank you.
So it was a really interesting experience for me. So in 2023, I published a little travel memoir,
Mhm.
which is just it's just like a free little ebook on my website. I don't make any
Mhm.
money from it because I couldn't be bothered to figure out how to monetize it, basically. Um,
Okay.
and it kind of just pops up every so often. People read it and they're like, "Oh yeah, I liked it." Um, and I didn't know exactly what to do, which is why I decided to go with a small press. I'm just rambling. I don't know if I'm even making sense.
You are. Yeah, yeah. It's fine. So you
So
decided to
when
go with a small press.
yes, and then Alien Buddha Press, I had read some of the works they'd published from authors who I follow on social media.
Mhm.
Authors that, like, obviously I respect them all. They're all
Mhm.
incredible. And it went very fast. I think it was like end of March, beginning of April that
Mhm.
I might actually have the date that I heard back from. It was mid April. I think it was literally about a month between acceptance and publication. So it went a lot faster than I expected. Um, and I had a really good experience. Red, who owns and runs the press, he's really
Mhm.
nice. I was very anxious about it,
Mhm.
and he would always like email me back really quickly. I was never like pressured to sign a contract before like I read it or went over it or something. I did feel quite supported by Red, and he definitely pushed my book once it was published. I kind of pushed it more leading up to publication date.
Mhm.
Um, I think part of the reason it went so fast was like I was able to edit the book myself.
Mm.
I was able to make the cover by myself. I literally just sent him over a few files, and he was like, "Oh, that's great." That's so I.
Banging.
I don't know if this is coming across as I mean. I mean, it was like a good experience, not that I was just like left behind. But I feel like because I was such a control freak about it, because
Mhm.
it's your baby, isn't it? Your book.
Yeah, of
Um,
course.
it kind of made it easier on both of us. I was able to have my worries assured,
Mm.
and he was able to do a lot of the behind the scenes stuff that I didn't know how to do without like much interference, because it was like, oh, I've already done this. So he's like, oh, I don't have to like be like, do you like this cover? What do you want changed? You know?
Mm. Yeah, so you, I mean, by having, you, I'm gonna start again. Bloody hell! So you basically gave yourself a lot of creative control, and they were supportive of that. I suppose that's
Yeah.
kind of the one of the beauties of going with an indie publisher is that you get a lot more creative control over what you have because you don't necessarily, and this isn't the same for everybody, so don't take words out of my mouth, people. But indie presses have a lot more flexibility and don't necessarily have to lean toward the sort of wider market and trends. And that seems to be why so many authors have found homes at indie presses because if it's not trending right now, some publishers might not touch it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. I definitely felt like I had a lot more control than I would have had.
Mm.
I'm a very anxious person. I have quite a severe anxiety disorder.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like although I'm still pursuing traditional publication with other projects, um, I feel like the indie experience was closer to what I would have wanted, especially for my first experience publishing.
Mm. That's awesome to hear. I'm glad to hear that. And
And I've just
I
scared off
yeah
any other people who might want to publish me, but I'm not
No,
that
I don't
bad.
think so, honestly. I think only about 3 people are going to listen to this anyway.
Yeah.
So I won't worry. But the thing is that you're a human being, you've got human being feelings, and when people create art, it is from their heart and their soul, or however you want to manifest it or describe it. But it's part of you, it's your experiences, it's your point of view, it's the thing you care about, and to let that thing go out into the world and to trust somebody else with it, even if you trust them generally, it must be a hard thing to do, because once it's left your hands, you've lost some control. So I imagine any person would be anxious about how that goes anyway. So I wouldn't put yourself down. So yeah, I'm glad that your experience with going through an indie press has been a really positive one from the sounds of it, and with you pursuing a traditional publication for another novel. I'd be interested to hear when the time comes that is successful, because I believe in you as a writer, and I think it will.
Aw.
It's going to take time, because the traditional publishing route is slower, because it's more
Oh,
competitive.
definitely. Oh, yes, I've had many arguments about this
Yes.
recently.
um,
Normally one-sided.
I'm sure it is. But it'll be interesting to hear, maybe in the future, once that's happened, it'll be really cool to have you back on the podcast for another episode, just to talk about the differences between the two, and kind of give people and future writers, future published writers, insight into what those two worlds look like, because you'll have lived both sides. So I've been really interested to see how that goes. Because you are currently a solely an indie writer, what is the biggest challenge for you at the moment?
I think one of the challenges that I didn't necessarily expect was how to present myself as an indie writer,
Okay.
um, which sounds weird, but it's on my mind at the minute because I'm currently job hunting
Okay.
and I'm looking at like marketing roles. And I'm going into interviews and being like, I know all about marketing. I'm an indie author. And it just feels like a very weird thing to present yourself as. I
I
don't know
see
if
what you
that's
mean.
because it's still like quite new.
Mm.
I mean, it isn't. It's been like, at the time of recording this, I think it's like literally 6 months since I published,
Mm.
um, and like it's still weird when people I know read my work. Um, I had this really great manager at my last job, Taz, who I'm still in contact with. We're still very good friends.
Mm-hmm.
And she, like, bless her, it was so sweet. She bought a copy of my book to give it away
Oh.
as a present, which was really weird.
Oh,
It's
that's
so
really
sweet.
nice,
She's like
though.
the loveliest person in the world. But like it was weird. I was like, what are you doing? Like it's weird to sort of be like, oh, hi, I'm Sarah, I'm an author, And
Yeah.
I think if you're like in the sort of writing publishing sphere,
Mm.
it's not weird. Like I'm trying to set up my blue sky at the minute. It's so like lovely and it's so nice to connect with people. And the
Mm-hmm.
minute you're like, oh, I'm an author, people are like, please tell me about your book. But like
It's
in the
nice,
real
isn't it?
world,
Uh-huh.
it's very weird to sort of present yourself as that.
I concur, because it's like you go into this little, as you say, the little like community of writers, the little sort of social media sphere community sort of thing. God, that was terrible. I'm a writer too. I don't know words. And then when you tell people that you write, it's to me it brings to mind that person that sits in Starbucks with their Apple Mac and writes the novel, and they're working on the screenplay, and it's always the butt of the joke in
Oh my
TV
god,
shows
yeah.
and stuff.
And I have been that person.
I've been that
Yeah.
person too, but when you're talking to other writers, they get it. They get the struggle,
Yes.
they get writer's block, they get why you're inspired by that person who left their scarf behind, whatever it is. And then when you talk to people that don't write, they're like, ugh, weirdo.
I think
Why are you Googling that?
My search history looks awful. Like,
Same. I
I'm
throw in some
definitely on a
random
list.
ones. Same.
You know what? When I was in university, it's a bit of a tangent. When I was in
Mm.
university, I did a degree in film studies, which is
Oh, cool.
basically English literature but for films. And
Oh.
my dissertation was on the presentation of terrorism in superhero films pre and post 9/11. So, you know, a bit of psychology, a bit of sociology, a lot of history went into it. I got myself banned from the internet for 3 days. Um,
No, stop it.
and I think what had happened, because this was around the time when there was quite an increase of terrorist attacks in Europe. And I remember specifically, it was around the time of, I don't know if you remember, but the Bataclan attack in Paris.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it very specifically because I had a friend who was visiting Paris that weekend, and
Oh,
we couldn't
wow.
get hold of her for like 12 hours, and it was terrifying. And she was fine, she was asleep. Um,
Okay.
she was
Well, I
nowhere
mean, I'm
near,
glad she
she
was
was
okay.
asleep.
Yeah.
But I think what happened, because there was that increased, I'm not going to say paranoia because it was obviously very real,
Mm.
but increased consciousness in the social sphere. Oh my god.
That was a
I
hard sentence. Don't worry.
I don't
It's
know why
fine.
gave it to myself. I think I got auto flagged, but because I was on like
uh,
JSTOR, um, the computer program must have been like, "What is going on?" And I phoned up the internet provider because there were 3 people in my house at the time who were doing dissertations, and we're like, "What's going on?" And they're like, "Oh, someone's been flagged for radicalization," and we all knew it was me. Um, and we're like, "Oh, well, we've not heard anything." They went, "No, because we're a bit confused as to what's going on because it doesn't look like you're being radicalized, but the keywords are coming up." And I had to read part of my dissertation down the phone to this lovely lady who told
uh-huh.
me that it was fantastic and that I was going to do fantastically. And I was like, please don't lie to
Oh,
me. And obviously, they contacted my university and
yeah,
confirmed everything with them. And they were like, "Oh, we're so sorry." And I was like, "No, don't be sorry. I'm sorry."
that's
And
so
then I went,
funny.
and then I went to see my tutor, who I was working on my dissertation with, and he pointed and laughed at me for 20 minutes.
Oh, wow, confidence boost. I
Yeah.
mean,
And now it feels like whenever I tell someone in real life that I'm a writer, I just imagine my personal tutor, who he was a difficult man, but he was genuinely quite nice. But
okay.
I just imagine him pointing and laughing at me. It's not the
Well,
same, but it feels like the
well done,
same.
tutor. You've horrified Sarah for life now.
What
If
was
you're
even
listening to
worse was he
this,
got he got the head of media to come in and point and laugh at me as well. And this guy had never met me in my life and had
oh
no
my
clue who I
god,
was or what happened. And my tutor was like, "Oh, laugh, laugh," and he was like, "Oh."
oh my god, that's horrendous. Oh, I mean, I would not be surprised. I'd be interested to know how many writers of similar things, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, have been banned. I've never heard of anyone being banned from the internet before. I didn't know that was a thing.
They just
So
they just
new
like
fear unlocked.
they just blocked us. It was just
That's
like your internet
crazy.
cannot connect. So we thought it was the router, and then we
Mm.
were like, "Oh shit, it's the dissertations, isn't it?" It's like,
See, oh,
so if you're going to do a film studies degree, be clever and don't do your dissertation on terrorism, no matter how much you want to talk about M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. It's not worth it. It's not worth the points and the laughs.
this is not the cautionary tale I thought it was going to be, and I've been thoroughly surprised and amused. Thank you. I'm not
It's
laughing
like
at you, by the way. I'm
it's like my
laughing
best
with
anecdote.
you. It's
No, actually, it's not my best anecdote, but my best anecdote is probably the one where I nearly got killed by a kangaroo, but that's not really relevant.
you can't just say that and not talk about it. Okay, we're gonna have a little sidebar within this podcast episode where we're not talking about your book, and I want to know how you nearly got killed by a kangaroo. Um, Again, let's get as many cautionary tales as we can out there because you might save somebody's life.
Probably not. Probably not. Okay. So it's 2020. It was before anything started in 2020.
Okay. Yep.
It was in that like safe 2 months
Hmm.
where we knew there was a virus, but it wasn't like,
We
because
can
I
still
don't
go
know what,
outside.
we could still go outside and everything. There was no
Hmm.
travel advisories. It was before everything kicked off.
Yeah.
And I had a friend who was living in Australia at that time, and I hadn't seen him for years. He was like, "Oh, come over to Australia," and I was like, "Free accommodation? Yes, yes." So I went over to Australia. He was living in Adelaide at the time. He's not anymore, so it's fine. I'm not doxing him. Um,
Okay.
but it was around the time they'd had quite a lot of bushfires
Hmm.
on Kangaroo Island, which I did visit. It's beautiful, beautiful island. They have their own special species of kangaroo on Kangaroo
Oh,
Island because it's like a closed ecosystem.
okay, that's cool.
So in the bushfires, obviously the it devastated the island, and they
Hmm.
managed to get quite a lot of the natural wildlife off of the island and save their lives. And there's a wildlife park called Cleland Wildlife Park in Adelaide, so they put them all in there.
Hmm.
So me and my friend were like, "Oh, we're going to go see all the kangaroos and all the natural wildlife." And he did trick me into seeing a huntsman spider, which was very mean of him.
I'd have broken up my friendship. That's not cool.
Our friendship was tested this day, let me tell you.
Yeah, no kidding.
We found out later. We bought some of the wildlife food, which you could give to the
Hmm.
wallabies as well.
Hmm.
And we were walking around, and we found out from one of the people who worked there that on Kangaroo Island, they didn't know who he belonged to, but there had been one of the big red kangaroos, the
Hmm.
ones you think of when you think of
Yeah.
kangaroos, had been on the island, which was very bizarre. And they figured that he'd been taken as a joey and raised in
Mm.
someone's house. And they were like, "Oh, he stays away from humans though. He seems to be quite traumatized." And we were
That's
like,
not funny.
"Okay,
I
we're not
can
going to
see where
bother
this
him.
is going.
We're not going to bother him, right?" So we were feeding these kangaroos. It was lovely. These tiny little Kangaroo Island kangaroos, because they're a lot smaller than
Hmm.
kangaroos you think of, right?
Yeah.
And then suddenly, I turn around, and this like 6 foot kangaroo is like right up in my face, and I'm like, "Oh my god, I'm gonna die." And my friend who I've known since my first day of university, which had been like nearly 10 years at this point, was just backing away, going, "You're going to be fine. I believe in you. Don't look him in the eye." Halfway across this fucking field, left me. No one around me. I'm like, "Oh my god, he knows that I'm a tourist, and he knows that I'm British, and everyone hates the British." And I didn't know what to do, and I just gave him the half-eaten bag of kangaroo food, and he just bounced away.
Did he take it with his little hand?
He took it. He took the entire bag. He just bounced away, and I genuinely thought I'd shit myself. I hadn't, but
Oh,
I. And then my
that's very
friend,
cute.
bless him, had gone and found someone. They came running back, and the guy was like, "Fucking Graham again."
That's funny. What a funny name for a kangaroo.
And I just remember like standing
I
there, like traumatized, shaking, being like, "It was called Graham."
did it take some of the wind out of its sails for you?
Not really, no.
Oh, okay. I do wonder if the kangaroo in his head was just like, I wonder if I go there and just stand there, if she'll just politely give me the food.
Oh, he
And I
knew
bet
what
you
he was
gave him the
doing.
food, and he was like, "Nice, it worked."
I think from the sounds of it, Graham had done this previously.
Repeat offender. Okay.
Yeah.
Mm. Well, that was a wonderful surprise. I
Yeah.
didn't expect any of that.
I did tell you before this, I will just
Bonus
ramble
content.
about random things. I did not expect to be telling the kangaroo story today.
Creative minds will always wander. It's all good.
Yeah. So trauma in the book.
Love a bit of trauma. So yeah, let's talk
Little
about
bit
the
trauma in the
book.
book. Luckily, there are no kangaroos. That I don't think that's a spoiler.
No, I
There
don't
were no
think that's
kangaroos
I don't
in
think that's a
Victorian
spoiler
era
either.
England.
Oh, what's the point then? No kidding. It's a great book. You could have slipped one in there. I wouldn't have even known. So with this book, so we've already established that you wrote it and it was published in a very short period of time, although you'd thought about it obviously previously. Of all the characters, because it's a kind of tight knit cast of characters, because it's about the sort of main theme is this oh my god, see, I'm doing it as well. These two families that have basically got a beef with one another due to various traumatic reasons. So who was the favorite character that you wrote?
I wouldn't say that there was a favourite character, but it always started with Beatrice and Lillian. They were always very much the whole core of the book. And when I started developing it, I started it with those two in mind. And they like sprung into my mind, like names and everything. And
So
they kind of all just fell in around them.
interesting. So did the other characters sort of make themselves known as you were writing it, or did you think, okay, well, I have to figure out how they get from point A to point B, or where's the contrition going to come from?
So it was kind of like a little bit of both. So obviously I knew. So obviously I knew that for the plot to start, Ada and Audrey had to be there. Or no, Aubrey. I can't remember my bloody character's name now.
Oh, is it Aubrey, not Audrey? Audrey's an old lady's name.
Yeah, I was like,
it might be a young
Audrey's
lady's name.
not right. No,
Should we
I
start
can't
that again?
stand him. He was awful to write.
He was a dick. I was like,
you know what?
As soon as he came into the scene, I was like, I don't like him.
When I worked in the cinema, I used to do the film quiz. I like would make up the film quiz and I hosted it. And when the book was published, I gave it away as a prize for the best team name. And then the next month, the team who had won it came in and she went, "Oh, he was a baddie, wasn't he?" I was like, "Yeah,
he is a baddie.
Yeah, he's a fucking dick, is what he is." I don't regret what happened to him.
No. I mean, that was a bit of a spoiler, but people get.
I mean, I feel like the whole premise of the book is a spoiler. I knew that those two existed, and I kind of knew whereabouts they existed, if that made sense, like which side of the family. And then a lot of the other characters, I sort of, and it's going to sound a weird way to say it, but like consciously made up. And I think in a way more detail went into them because I didn't have as much of a feel of them. For instance, it's not a spoiler, it's referenced in the text, but it's not a spoiler. There's a character called Victoria who is named specifically for Queen Victoria, which was a detail that I added in after adding in Queen Victoria, if that made sense.
Yeah.
But that was very intentional. And then the character who kind of came to me as I was writing it, because it was originally written with a different point of view, was Oliver. Because I was reading it in the first edit and I was like, it's not right. And I couldn't work out why it wasn't right. And then I was like, oh, obviously, this is what's wrong.
So, had you written most of it out at that point?
I had, and luckily I had handwritten it, so so it was easy to sort of go back and like look at what I'd written and be like, oh, I can put this here. I work much better on paper than I do on a computer, which is really shit for me because I have arthritis. So my body doesn't like it, but my brain works better that way.
Yeah.
And I think because I had it on paper, it was handwritten, I was able to see where Oliver fit in the narrative.
Okay. Yeah, I find because I'm I'm a sort of visual and kinesthetic person, so I prefer to use a like pen or actually prefer to use a pencil and paper. I like to scribble and make shapes and draw lines to things and arrows and highlight stuff and circle it, and I feel more connected to what I'm writing. And then when it comes to actually structuring something, I then transfer it onto a computer because I find it easier to like move stuff around. But when it comes
Oh
to the
yeah,
more creative side of stuff, I have to scribble it somewhere frantically, usually.
I'm the same, I think. Although
So,
I don't tend to structure. I'm awful. I just write. I have like bullet points of this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is
mm,
going to happen, and that's it.
I do the same. I break it into like chapters, and then I'm like, these are the things that need to happen in order for this to make sense, and then I go and fill it all in.
I don't even have that. I have literally half a page just of bullet points.
Oh wow,
I'm awful. And I'm
it's not
not like that
awful.
in real life at all. I'm very like I I was one of those kids, a pleasure to have in class, who was always like very
Mm,
dedicated to schoolwork, and I used to write out notes a lot because it's how I would learn, and
mm.
I still have like reams and reams of papers of notes and things, and I was always very into researching. But when it comes to my own stuff, I'm like, oh yeah, that's the skeleton, and I'll work on it when I get to it. It doesn't make any sense.
We're just weird little creatures, I think. Little.
I do refer to myself. I'm working on like a non-fiction thing at the minute, and
Mm.
I refer to myself when I'm writing that as the film gremlin.
Oh, I love it. Gremlins, goblins, ghouls. Big
My
fan.
sister, because I work on multiple things at the same time, because
Mm,
I mean, I'm pretty sure there's some undiagnosed neuroatypical stuff going on up there. But my sister's like,
possibly.
are we fiction gremlin today or are we non-fiction?
That's so savage, but I kind of love it. I love that so much.
It
Um,
doesn't help if you've got the picture of me like in an hoodie, like hunched over, like
that absolutely
paper
helps,
everywhere.
Sarah.
That's my brand.
Do you know what? We're not that many steps away from like a big quill and ink everywhere and paper scattered and candlelight, hair all crazy, like back
That
in the
scene
day.
in Little Women where Joe is
Mhm.
writing in the attic, that is me. Just less put together.
Nobody has to. I mean, we're finding out how the sausage is made today, which is one of my favorite phrases. And it's disgusting. It's just such a
Yes.
disgusting thing to say, but I love it because it's very easy to read a book and forget that a human was behind it because it's this thing, isn't it? It's just like it's an item. And you read it and then you make all the pictures up in your head and you're like, cool, that was nice. And then when you learn about the gremlins and goblins
Yeah.
writing it, you're like, oh wow, that's cool. Somebody actually stressed over this and sweated over it and possibly even cried. I know that if you read any of my work, it's had tears in it, I promise you, out of frustration or you know, thinking, oh, this doesn't work and scribbling it out. And there were other iterations of it. And maybe that character wasn't even called that before. And it's fascinating to me. I'm hoping that other people listen to these episodes and they get to know you guys a little bit better. So if by giving the visualization of you as a little gremlin um, helps people to take interest in your work, then I think that is fantastic.
I always really hope when people read something that I've written that they can tell that emotion's gone into it.
Oh,
And like
definitely.
I'm kind of getting that a bit in a minute because I'm getting a lot of query replies back for the novel that I'm querying,
Mm.
uh, which I'm going to talk about now because I'm obsessed with it.
Go
Just
ahead.
briefly, it's called Europe Start Killing Now, and it's a Eurovision set murder mystery with vampires. And
Oh my goodness.
that's the reaction most people say come out with. Like they're like, "What?" Um, but it Eurovision is something that I sort of picked up in 2020.
Mhm.
Obviously, we were all having the worst time.
Oh, big time, yeah.
And I was mentally in a very, very bad place.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of glommed onto it, and it became my happy place. So with what happened this year, but last year
Mm-hmm.
when this is playing was not fun.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the feedback that I get from it is people like, you can really tell that you care. You can like,
Mm.
I had a really nice rejection the other day. It was like, your work, your voice is so commercial and lively, but it's also like, you can tell that you love this. And I was like, yes, I
That's a
just want
really
that to
nice
come
compliment.
across.
Yeah.
It's really nice. And then they go, but we don't know how to market it. And I'm like, oh,
That's the gremlin in you.
it's a gremlin being like, give it to me. I've got ideas.
It's oh my god, I'm gonna
Because
write those down.
apparently I'm Gollum.
Honestly, I swear most writers and creative people are proper gremlins, and that's why I call everyone a goblin. I know they're different things. If you're listening to this and you're an expert on goblins and gremlins, like my nephew, who is didn't realize there was so I didn't realize there were so many different kinds of goblin until he asked me what type of goblin I am. I won't reveal that because
What's
it's
his
personal.
favourite goblin?
I think he said it was a hobgoblin.
Oh, I was going to say hobgoblin. That's a good one.
Yeah. I feel like there's a different one and I've forgotten. And he'll probably chastise me for saying the wrong kind of goblin.
Oh God,
But anyway,
not the
I feel
Ron
like creative
goblin.
people are a little bit like, like this cackling weirdo that's got this crazy idea, and they're like, now it's a thing, and you're like, cool, I enjoy that as well. Whether it's like art that's visual or written, it speaks to my soul. um, so I'm gonna go back to Aubrey for a second, because he's a bastard.
Yeah.
Was it
Yeah.
hard? Aubrey the bastard is what we're gonna call
That's
him.
how I should remember it. I don't know why. I made him and I can't remember his fucking name. I think it's because I genuinely hate him.
He doesn't deserve to be remembered properly.
Yeah. I should have reread the book before coming on this, honestly. But
That's all right. Don't worry.
but I read it so many times at the beginning of this year. I was so sick of it.
It's fine. Honestly, I call my grandma calls me the dog's name sometimes, so don't worry about it. She's known me for 30 years, so sometimes she'll call me Jarvis, and that's not my name. So
Is it not?
it's not. No, it's actually Saf, or Saffron, or Safi, whatever sounds
Wow.
similar.
I feel like I've learned something today.
There you go. I'm not. My name's not Jarvis. I'm
It's not
sorry if I
Jarvis.
led you to believe that was my name. But I want to go back to the bastard. So, did you find writing his storyline or his character aggravating in any way? Because when I write villain type characters or assholes, I get annoyed that they exist, but they have to be there.
Yeah, I tend to write, not every project, but most projects I tend to write chronologically. It just kind of, especially when I'm handwriting, it just kind of helps me. I know people say if you're stuck, move on to a different scene. I can't always do that with projects. So
Yeah.
I kind of knew what was going to happen before I got to it. And I would just have this really horrible, like, dread when I knew one of his scenes was coming up. I mean, not just his scene, there's a lot of characters that do bad things. There was one that really, really hurt to write, which isn't an Aubrey scene at all. But I was just like, why am I doing this? Why am I writing it? Just, it wasn't even that I was like aggravated by it. I just had this really horrible sense of dread, knowing that I was coming up to the scenes. So when I wrote the ending, and the ending literally sort of encapsulated how I felt about that project. I'm trying not to spoil it, but like I was just like, yeah, there you go.
I mean, yeah, I get what you're saying, and I'm gonna try not to give any spoilers away. But it ends in a way where you could comfortably call that the end of the story.
Yes,
but it could also possibly be something extra. Do you have any plans to make it a sequel, or carry the story on, or write short stories attached to it?
I don't think so. Um,
Okay.
not a sequel. I kind of know what happens after, and
Mm,
I don't think it would be a compelling story. I don't think.
interesting.
I mean, I feel like I could make a novelette out of it, maybe like 5 to 10,000 words. I don't think it would even get to novella territory. And I think ultimately,
Mm,
what the story, it would be disappointing, because I feel like it
mm,
ends one way where there's an ending that's expected, but I feel like even though it's not based in reality, and there is, I mean, I try to sort of infuse the possibility of a supernatural element, but it doesn't feel like that goes past what happens at the end of the book. I sound like a right twat. It's like I know what happens to the people at the end of the book, and it's not going to be what
mm.
people want to hear. Um, it's like,
Yeah.
I had a friend beta reading a project related to the Eurovision book, and there's a
Mm-hmm.
character who's non-binary in it, who has a
Mm-hmm.
chosen name, and I got really pissed off with my friends because they were like, "Oh, but like, what was that person's name before? Like, what was Kipper's name before?" And I was like, "I don't know, but even if I did know, I wouldn't tell you. You know, considering the end of the story,
Mm.
that there is a need for a sequel, and the idea of a
Yeah.
prequel. I mean, I don't know, because in my head, there was always more of a sort of love hate dynamic between Beatrice and Lillian
Mm.
that I feel that I kind of wanted to explore, but I didn't feel like made sense at that point of their
Yeah.
lives. And that's the only thing that I would necessarily go back to. But I also kind of feel like it doesn't need to be done because, like, we know what happens.
Absolutely, and I think that's one of the important things to recognize when you're creating something is, does there need to be more, or is it good, and like, is the story as it is good enough? Because if you consider it as like the history of these characters from their birth to their death, right? You have taken the bit that's the most interesting within that history and presented that as the story. And sometimes we don't need to know the why and the aftermath, because you already know what the aftermath is. It's devastation, or it's confusion, or it's redemption, or whatever, the chosen end is. And it's not a cliffhanger. So to anyone that's considering reading it, which
Oh
you
no, it's
should because it's
definitely
a good
not.
book, it's not a cliffhanger. It
No,
has the potential, but as the person creating it, you have to recognize if you're going to be laboring a point just to write a book. Do you know what I mean?
I also kind of feel like with the setup of the book, without going into spoilers,
Mm.
it's not in real time,
Mm.
and it's written from the point of view of a character who is not there,
Yeah.
and so there are points where I try to make it obvious that where they're trying to piece together what's happened, and there's bits where they come out and be like, "Is this what happened? I don't know. This is what I imagine happened."
Mm.
Um, and so I don't think you can go back unless
Mm.
I was going to completely change the conceit of the book.
Yeah, you'd have to, well, have a different narrator.
Yeah.
And then does that take away the magic of the story? Possibly. Because that's one of the interesting things about it, is the point of view of the person telling the story in the first place. Um, it has been such a pleasure talking to you about your creative process, going off on
Oh,
tangents, learning about you as a writer, learning about the dangers of
kangaroos.
kangaroos.
Yeah.
um, it's honestly been a lot of fun, and I've laughed a lot, and it's been such a joy. I
Oh,
did
thank
want
you.
to, oh, of course, I did want to ask you something before we sort of finish the episode. I wanted to ask you about the title. Now,
Title.
I did not look up the title until I'd read the book, and I don't think it spoils anything, or doesn't spoil much at all. But tell me about your choice of title and why you went with this in the end.
So I am notoriously terrible at titles. I'm awful. It's part of the reason why I just write like chapter one, because I can't think of titles and it needed a name.
Hmm.
And I couldn't think of anything in English that made sense to me for what the book was called. So I did my typical trick. I've done this for other projects as well that just
Hmm.
aren't published yet, where I found a sort of vibe in a different language to sort of match the book. So with my other project that I'm working on, I took a word from Old English,
Hmm.
and I thought about using Old English, and then I was like, that's too much of a brand right now.
Hmm.
Um, and I found a couple words in Latin. So Amissis Liberis is a Latin phrase that means the lost children or the lost child.
Hmm.
To represent, I would say there's a good three characters
Hmm.
it represents. In my opinion, you might have a differing opinion.
Yeah.
To me, it very much represents three key characters. Um, and I honestly still wasn't set on it even when I was querying. I was like,
Really?
yeah, I'm just terrible at titles. I can never name things. The only reason that the Eurovision book is named what it is because it's quite a famous like quote for Eurovision. And I
Hmm.
was like, oh, that'll work. And now I'm attached. Um, I had a screenplay that I wrote that was called the it's something like the Untitled Parisian Project, and I physically couldn't name it because I got attached to that name.
Are you happy with its name now?
Yeah, I can't. Yeah, I am. I think I can't imagine it with a different name.
Mm.
But I just couldn't find any. That literally, I just could not find. I tried to name it after the houses.
Hmm.
I had like a big convoluted like traditional Gothic title at one point. It just
Hmm.
this fits the best, I think.
I think it fits pretty well, and especially if you have the context of what its translation is from Latin, it's like, okay, it's funky and also it has a meaning behind it.
Yeah, it felt to me like an Easter egg, and I really
Mhm.
enjoy writing Easter eggs into my work. So I think that's why I settled on it.
Yeah,
But
I can totally see that.
but like, if the publisher had come back and been like, "That's a terrible title, we need to change it," I wouldn't have had problems with changing it at that point.
So you weren't
But
like
now,
emotionally attached to it at the
yeah,
time.
but now obviously I am.
Well, that's cool, and I don't think it gives anything away. I don't think it would have spoiled the book for me in any way because I'd have been like, well, why are the children lost or who are the
Yeah.
children? So, um, yeah, I don't think it ruins anything telling anyone that. But what I will say is thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you for
Um,
having me. This has been like my first podcast experience ever, and it's been
oh my
such a
gosh.
fantastic one.
Oh, I'm so glad.
In
It's been a
fact,
ride. It's been a
yes,
real wild ride, and
it didn't even
I've
feel
enjoyed it.
like we were doing a podcast. It just felt like we were having a chat. I was like, I could chat for like 3 more hours. I probably shouldn't because it's like 11:30. No, it's not. It's like 10:30 my time.
Oh my god, it is. You're in England. I'm in America. This is crazy. Well, thank you so much for staying up to talk to me. I'm glad it's a
That,
Friday.
that's
Um,
fine. I would only literally be watching Taskmaster anyway, so because that's
that's
my
fine.
newest hyperfixation. It's, uh,
Oh,
it's Greg
well, I hope
Davis.
you. Is who?
Greg Davis. I
Is
sound
Greg
like a
Davis on Taskmaster? Oh, do you know
yes.
what? I was thinking of Greg Wallace.
No,
I
Greg
was like,
Wallace
what
is
the
my
fuck's he
enemy.
doing
I'll
there?
tell you another time.
So I'm going to send you a picture of my Greg Wallace mug that I got as a joke from my nephew because I said that
Oh
if I
God.
lost all my hair, I'd look like Greg Wallace. I'm so glad that you had a good time today. I really did as well, and this was so much fun. Before I close off this wonderful conversation, I just want you to let the listeners know where can they find you in your work.
So I have a master list of all of my work on my website, which is
Hmm.
sarahrnew.wordpress.com.
Hmm.
I'm on Blue Sky and Instagram, and I'm still on Twitter, but I don't know how long for.
Hmm.
Um, at the username Aldbera, so it's ALDBERA. I don't know where the word came from. I found it and I glommed onto it years ago.
It's fine. It's yours now. So I'll add those links onto the description of the episode so that people can find you and your work. But yeah, thank you again for today. It's been such a pleasure, and I hope that people are intrigued by your fantastic work, and hopefully in the future we'll have another episode where we can talk about your experience in the traditional world versus the indie world, but we shall see.
We shall see. It might be self-published at this rate. You never know.
We can still have another episode.
Yeah, no one knows how to approach Eurovision. Everyone's scared of the EBU. So. Not me though.
They got taken on with both hands.
I will fight Martin Österdahl, and I don't care if he's threatened by that.
You heard it here first, folks. It's going to be like that Jason Fury or whatever this friggin' name is. Jake Paul.
Jason Fury.
Jake Paul and Tyson. What the frick is his name? Mike Tyson. Fight.
Jason Fury is coming after you, Martin Österdahl.
I'm gonna wet myself. I bet I'm gonna stop this friggin' recording. I'm gonna keep this in. Thank you, listeners.
Good, he needs to know.
Us. Thank you for joining us, listeners. I hope that you have had an unhinged time with us. And thank you for being here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for having me.